It is 12:33 in the afternoon, April 28, 2025. Across Spain, more than half of all electricity is coming from the sun. The sky is clear. The grid is humming at exactly 50 Hz, as it has done every second of every day for the last 40 years. In Madrid, Coco Gauff is finishing a tennis match. In Lisbon, the day shift at the Alfredo da Costa Maternity Hospital is settling in. And in a quiet village outside Orense, an 81-year-old retired electrician is sitting near a small petrol generator that the town council lent him that morning. He doesn't know it yet, but in 27 seconds, the grid he spent his life building will collapse. By 12:34, 55 million people across Spain and Portugal had no electricity. 31 gigawatts of demand vanished from the grid in less than 2 minutes. To put that in perspective, it is the entire combined consumption of Belgium and Denmark gone in the time it takes to brew a cup of coffee. Madrid stopped. Lisbon stopped. Barcelona stopped. 47 million people on the mainland, plus Andorra and parts of southwestern France, lost contact with the European electrical system. The Iberian Peninsula became, for the first time in modern history, an electrical island, and it was an island that had just been switched off. 35,000 passengers were stranded on trains and metros. 126 trains stopped in the middle of nowhere. Some passengers opened the doors and walked toward Valencia through farmland. In Madrid alone, the fire brigade carried out 174 elevator rescues in 14 hours. The emergency line, 112, processed more than 3,000 calls. By the end of the day, 8 people would be dead. This is the autopsy of how an entire country lost its grid in 27 seconds, and why the cause was buried in a piece of paper that had been sitting on a regulator's desk for 5 years. To understand what happened on April 28th, you have to understand a peculiar fact about the Iberian Peninsula. Electrically speaking, Spain and Portugal are almost an island. Most of continental Europe is connected by a dense mesh of transmission lines that share power across borders constantly. Germany and France exchange gigawatts every hour. Italy is plugged in to 4 neighbors. If a single plant trips offline in Bavaria, 11 other countries absorb the shock without anyone noticing. Spain and Portugal are connected to all of that by just one thread, a handful of high-voltage lines crossing the Pyrenees into France. The total capacity of that thread is about 2,800 megawatts, roughly 3% of Spain's installed generation. The European Union has been pushing member states for years to reach at least 15%. Spain has never come close. A new high-voltage line through the Pyrenees was first proposed 40 years ago. It is still being built. It was supposed to be ready in 2025. It is now expected to come online in 2028. This matters because of what an island can absorb and what it can't. The bigger the grid, the more disturbances it can swallow. On April 28th, the Iberian Peninsula was a small grid carrying a very modern load. At 12:30, more than 70% of the electricity flowing through it was coming from sources that do not behave like traditional power plants. They are not spinning machines. They are inverters, solar panels and wind farms, governed not by physics but by software. This combination, small grid, software-driven generation, single thread to the continent, is what made the Iberian system uniquely vulnerable. But none of that, on its own, caused the blackout. The blackout was caused by something else, a failure to control voltage. 12:32 and 57 seconds. Somewhere near Granada, a large generation node trips offline. 355 megawatts disappear from the grid. This, by itself, is not unusual. The system is built to absorb it, but it doesn't. 12:33 and 16 seconds, 19 seconds later, a solar facility near Badajoz drops out, taking 727 megawatts with it. 2 seconds after that, a cluster of generators across 5 provinces around Seville disconnects almost simultaneously. 928 megawatts gone in the span of a single breath. The frequency of the grid, which should sit at 50 Hz with variations smaller than 1/100th, drops to 48 in 3 seconds. Automatic protection systems begin shedding load. It is not enough. 12:33 and 21 seconds, the alternating current lines crossing the Pyrenees disconnect from France. 12:33 and 24 seconds, the high-voltage direct current submarine cable disconnects. The thread is cut. The island is alone, and the island goes dark. The question every engineer asked over the next 11 months was, why? Why did 3 trips in 3 different regions, separated by tens of kilometers, happen within 24 seconds of each other? Was it a cyber attack? Was it the sun? Was it sabotage? The investigation that followed was the largest cybersecurity audit ever conducted on the Spanish electrical system. It ruled out a cyber attack within 6 weeks. It would take another 8 months, and a 440-page final report from the European Network of Transmission System Operators to deliver the real verdict. It was none of the obvious answers. It was voltage. Here is what most people, even most engineers outside the power industry, never have to think about. Electricity is not just energy. It is voltage, and it is frequency. A power plant doesn't just produce kilowatts. It also produces or absorbs reactive power, which is what controls the voltage of the grid. If voltage rises too high, equipment burns out. If it falls too low, motors stall and the grid begins to collapse. For 100 years, this was easy. Traditional power plants, coal, gas, nuclear, hydro, have giant spinning turbines that naturally regulate voltage as they spin. The control was built into the physics. Solar panels and modern wind farms have no spinning turbine. They use inverters, high-speed electronic switches that convert direct current into alternating current. Inverters can control voltage, but only if they are programmed to do so. By default, many of them aren't. They run in what engineers call fixed power factor mode, which means they ignore the voltage of the grid entirely. On April 28th, when the first trip happened near Granada and active power dropped, the solar plants didn't compensate. They didn't push reactive power back into the system. They didn't do what a traditional plant would have done. Voltage began to climb. The nuclear plants, the gas plants, the hydro plants, the ones that were legally required to hold voltage steady, also failed. According to the final ENTSO-E report, Spain's conventional generators were meeting their voltage reference less than 75% of the time on April 28th. The voltage on the 400 kilovolt grid climbed to 435, well above its design limit. And then the safety mechanisms turned on their own grid. Many of the generators in southern Spain had overvoltage protection settings configured below the regulatory voltage envelope and configured to trip instantly with no delay. The moment voltage exceeded threshold, hundreds of megawatts disconnected themselves. Each disconnection raised voltage further. Each rise tripped more generators. This is a cascade, and it was not stopped by the system that was supposed to stop it. Because the system that was supposed to stop it had been sitting in a filing cabinet for 5 years. In Spain, the rules governing how power plants must support grid voltage are called Procedimientos de Operación, operating procedures. The relevant one is numbered 7.4. It was written in the year 2000. In 2000, the Spanish grid had about 2 gigawatts of installed solar. By April 2025, it had 32. The country built one of the largest solar fleets in Europe, under rules that predated almost all of it. A draft revision of Procedimiento Operativo 7.4 was prepared in 2020. It would have required all generators, including the new solar and wind installations, to actively control voltage, not just operate at a fixed power factor. It would have introduced penalties for non-compliance. It was sent to the Comisión Nacional de los Mercados y la Competencia, the regulator that has to approve such procedures, in 2020. 5 years later, on the morning of April 28, 2025, it was still in their inbox. This is the central finding of the European report. The Iberian blackout was not caused by renewables. It was not caused by low inertia, or by climate, or by a foreign attack. The European panel was explicit in its summary: the problem is voltage control, regardless of the type of generation. The Spanish system had been adding new generation faster than it had been writing new rules to govern it, and the rules it did write, it never approved. When the cascade began in Granada at 12:32 and 57 seconds, there was no contractual obligation for the country's largest solar plants to push voltage back down. So they didn't. A memo could have prevented this. European report runs to 440 pages. It names no person. The Spanish government opened a public inquiry in June. It named no one either. A year later, no senior official, no plant operator, no regulator has been held formally responsible. 8 people were: Biliana, 46, in Alzira, whose oxygen concentrator stopped working when the power did; Sonia, 52, in a Madrid neighborhood, who lit a candle and whose flat caught fire; a patient with motor neuron disease in Castilla y León, whose ventilator failed before the emergency generators arrived; a 77-year-old woman in Agualvacasame, near Lisbon, who had been on a ventilator 24 hours a day. The backup battery lasted 3 hours. She did not. And in Taboadela, a village of 400 people outside Oiense, 3 members of one family: Francisco Dacal, 81, a retired electrician and the village's justice of the peace; his wife Antonia, 77; their son Francisco Jose, 56, born with a disability, known to everyone in the village simply as Francisquito. Francisco had been recently diagnosed with cancer and slept with a respirator. When the lights went out, the town council lent the family a small petrol generator. They placed it in the ground floor cellar, what in Galicia is called a bodega. The ventilation was poor. They went to bed. The carbon monoxide rose silently through the floor. The next morning, the home help arrived for her usual round. The door was locked. The neighbors called the Guardia Civil. The 3 of them were found together. The forensic report described it as a muerte dulce, a gentle death, the kind where you go to sleep and the air becomes a little thinner, and then it stops mattering. The house has been closed ever since. The shutters down, the grass tall. A neighbor asked about them, said only they were never recognized as victims. The Iberian blackout was not a failure of physics. The frequency dropped because the voltage rose. The voltage rose because the inverters did not absorb reactive power. The inverters did not absorb reactive power because no rule required them to. No rule required them to because a procedure had been waiting 5 years for approval. Every link in that chain was made by a human being. Every link was preventable. The European Network of Transmission System Operators issued 22 recommendations in March 2026. 8 of them concern voltage control. None of them are technically difficult. Several were already part of the unapproved draft of Procedimiento Operativo 7.4. The Spanish regulator approved a revised version of the rule in October 2025, 6 months after the blackout. It is now in force. Renewables in Spain are now contractually obligated to support voltage. Conventional plants face penalties when they do not. A new submarine cable across the Bay of Biscay is being built to triple Spain's interconnection capacity with France. It is scheduled to be operational in 2028. The blackout will not happen the same way twice, but it took 55 million people without electricity, 8 deaths, and 1.6 billion euros to get a memo off